Unless you want me to walk around you a whole bunch of times. Afternoon. Happy to be here. Sure you guys are too. Who wants to talk about 1,064 horsepower and what that does to your insides? It's a ton of fun though. My name's Dustin Gartner. I'm the assistant chief engineer on small block engines. Luckily enough, I'm responsible for the Gemini family of engines. So that's the LT6 and the LT7. They kind of give you a little bit of history there between the two. The whole Gemini program, which we kind of codenamed it way back when. I know we talked about that at length during the LT6 launch and reveal. At that time, we told everybody the Gemini twins was twin throttle bodies, twin intake manifolds, that sort of thing on the LT6. Yeah, that was a load. The Gemini twins was really the fact that we were doing two engines. The LT6 and the LT7 were going to be together from the beginning. In fact, we codenamed internally Thelma and Louise. So the LT6 is not, or the LT7 is not an LT6 with turbos on it. They were co-developed together, and they're drastically different where they need to be different. We initially laid out the architecture back in the fall of 2015, so it's a long time coming to be able to talk about this. So with that, make this a little interactive. If something comes up, shout it out, let me know. I'm kind of making this up as I go, but start off with what's the same between them, right? So being in the Gemini family, they both are 5.5 liter. They share the same block structure, flat plane crank. The lubrication systems which were integral to these engines, internally two of them, which is a big part of the block. They both still carry the 6-stage scavenge system that's in the LT6. So 4 for the crankbase, 1 for one head and 1 for the other head and front cover. The LT7 adds a 7th scavenge stage. So there's 7 return pumps and 1 pressure pump. So we got 8 oil pumps in the LT7. That 7th stage is dedicated for the turbos. So the turbos have dedicated active scavenging. As I'll talk about later, they sit very low and tight to the engine, so you can't gravity get oil back out of there. So we actively scavenge the oil. And to go back to another kind of fun fact around that 7th scavenge stage, it's in every LT6 for the most part. Every LT6 oil pump has 7 scavenge bays in it. We just put a spacer and we don't put gears in the 7th. So I'm surprised nobody's noticed that and counted that and made a question there. And then the passageways for the turbo oil returns, those are all cast in the lower crankcase. Those passages are in every LT6 too. So there's a whole bunch of turbo features that are there. Once again, getting back to the fact that the LT7 is not an afterthought. We're designing the two for these two different missions from the beginning. So with that, the blocks are common, other than some machining. There's some added holes we manufacture in the block for turbo oiling and coolant lines. Those casting features are on every LT6 that are in there. I'm talking about Easter eggs. If you look at the oil tank on the LT6 on the side, you notice the bottom of it is scalloped out in like kind of a very round half circle pocket with nothing in it. Well, when you see the LT7 and where the turbo and the air duct is, you figure out why we shaped the oil tank that way. It was packaged in there from the beginning. So let's build up from the bottom. So the crankshaft, as I said, it's the same flat plane crank. The crankshaft is almost identical. There's some additional machining we do on the counterweights to make clearance for the power cell, the rod piston assembly. And to kind of walk up, that's where things really start getting different. It's got a unique rod from the LT6. It is much thicker at the small end, and it has a bigger pin boring. Still forged titanium, but once again, much stronger and set up to house a much larger wrist pin. That wrist pin is bigger in diameter and thicker itself. It feels like a socket compared to the LT6 pin. Once again, we're building up to the massive combustion loads we're putting through this engine. So bring that up further to the piston. Piston moves from the LT6, has a very dome-shaped top of the piston to a very dish-shaped top of the piston on the LT7. That's part halfway to get to a lower compression ratio. Also, when we dished it and made it thicker, that pushed the pin center line lower in the piston. So the LT7 rod is actually shorter than the LT6 rod by a little over 4 millimeters. Once again, packaging that bigger pin, much thicker piston, we're asking it to take a lot more pressure and do a lot more work. Moving up to that into the cylinder head, the LT7 has a completely unique cylinder head casting. It doesn't share castings at all with the LT6. Did that for several good reasons. The combustion chambers are different between the 6 and 7. The LT7 has a much larger combustion chamber. Once again, going after the compression ratio. So we dropped from the 12.5 to 1 compression ratio on the LT6 down to 9.8 to 1 on the LT7. Much more boost friendly when we're looking at the kind of boost pressures we run on this engine. So with that, what else is different? The head, the intake ports are a little different. They have provisions on there because we have an additional port fuel system in the intake manifold, which I'll talk to more on that in a minute. It's more to give the fuel spray the room it needs in the intake port. The exhaust ports are very different on the LT7 versus the LT6. On the LT6, the exhaust ports are very even, and they start turning the gas flow up because we're trying to get it up into the tubular headers out and over. The LT7's heads, exhaust ports, almost do the exact opposite. The outer ones are even turning inward, and they all start to curl down before they meet up with the turbo manifold. Before I get to that, the rest of the cylinder head, the valve train layout is essentially the same as the LT6. They use the same rigid mechanical finger follower system. Obviously, the cam timing, cam load strategy is different, boosted versus naturally aspirated. And then, yeah, that covers the head. So, moving to the interesting bits. So, with those exhaust ports turning the gas flow inward and down, they enter into a common manifold turbine housing casting. We call it a mani turbo. So there isn't a manifold, then a turbo mounted to it. They're one integral piece. So what that does is it keeps your turbine wheel just a few inches from your exhaust valve. Immediately you can see it on the car over here how compact the turbo is. We turn that exhaust gas together, join it to one, and then it's right there on the turbine wheel. So when you're trying to get the exhaust engine to the turbo, right, you got 2 inches to go, versus if the turbo's mounted far away, this is stacking up to what you do to reduce turbo lag. With that in that turbine housing, it's a 63 millimeter turbine wheel on that side. It's made out of a Mar alloy. It's a very high nickel content, pretty exotic grade of steel. It's capable of temperatures approaching 900 degrees F. So, fun fact we use to put that in perspective, that's 2/3 of the surface of the space shuttle on re-entry. So we're doing a lot of work in these turbos. So those turbine wheels are then coupled through the bearing housing, which is a ball bearing housing. The advantage of those is friction reduction. So now all the energy going into that turbine, you're not wasting that much of it on friction. It's going into accelerating that turbo speed, which brings you forward into the compressor stage. That's a 76 millimeter, which is a big turbo in the turbo world. 76 millimeter mono-scroll ported shrouded turbo. We went with the mono-scrolls because the amount of power we're looking to make, the only path to get there was a big mono-scroll turbo. So the negatives of the mono-scrolls, I know people ask why do dual scrolls or variables, things like that. Those can give you a little benefit down low, but they really choke off up high, and we wanted to maintain the high power level. And when I go through the torque and stuff here in a minute, we're really not losing anything. With that, the ported shroud on the mono-scroll really helps them at low speed, so you mitigate a lot of the negatives of the mono-scroll turbo with that ported shroud configuration. Additionally, on the turbos, we have electric wastegate control, so it's not looking at engine vacuum, it's not a mechanical system, it's truly an electrical mechanical system. So via the engine controller, we can vary the wastegate in any condition we want to any position we want. We use that in conjunction with speed sensors that we have on the turbos, so we always know the turbo speed and the pressure sensors to do some pretty trick things on the track. So under dynamic driving situations, so you tip out for a braking zone or a corner, you're still carrying engine speed. Yes, your throttles are closed, but you're still moving a lot of air through the exhaust. The engine controller will go into what we call boost control, or closed loop boost management. So for that braking zone and corner, we will actuate the wastegates with the throttles closed, maintain a boost pressure in the charged part of the circuit. So when you exit the corner and you roll in the pedal, the turbo's already at speed and you already have pressure in the pressurized system. So in those conditions, turbo lag is essentially non-existent. Additionally, we do another form of boost control. We call it the steady state boost control. So if you're driving steady state and you have the RPMs higher than cruising speed and a light load, read that is roll race, you're getting ready to do a slap watt. In those conditions, we actually move the phasers and the wastegates, everything in optimal position to be ready to instantly build boost. So you don't have to wait for those other actuators to go any places. So that really reduces the turbo lag there. And then obviously from a standstill, kind of the things I talked about. Turbine wheel close to the exhaust manifold, ball bearing turbos, and then from that to help turbo lag and the rest of the configurations. I know I'm talking pretty fast here, it's a problem I have. Those feed up into on-engine water-to-air intercoolers. You can see the big silver bricks on the engine over here. They're very large. very efficient. We can have, over 200-degree air coming out of the turbos. But they're very tight, compact to the engine. Once again, reducing the amount of air you have to compress. So you build pressure faster. Those feed up into an intake manifold that is completely separated left to right. We don't have communicator valves like we do on the LT6. And that intake manifold has much lower air volume as well. Once again, back to faster response time, less turbo lag, all the good things that brings you. Sticking with the intake manifold, it also carries an additional port fuel system. So we have 16 injectors. We still have the exhaust side DI, that's on the LT6, but we have that additional port fuel on the intake. Now we absolutely needed those extra injectors for peak fuel. So at peak power, we're using all 16 injectors full bore. And if you could hold 1,000 plus horsepower somewhere straight, continuously, the engine will consume almost 2 gallons of fuel a minute, is how much we're pumping through that. But you'll be going pretty darn fast if you're consistently making 1,000 horsepower for a minute plus. So it's a complete monster in that sense. We do use the system for more than just top-end fuel. We blend the two fuel systems together throughout the operating range. And in fact, after the cold start and the engine's idling, we shut the DI system off, and it idles on port fuel, which gives you, I don't want to say the DI system's a non-pleasing sound, but you create a much nicer sounding idle because you don't hear the DI injectors anymore because the PFI are much quieter. Kind of a secondary benefit doing that has emissions advantages. Then we blend the two fuel systems together throughout the operating range for a myriad of benefits that they give us. So, kind of with that, we talked about the power. Hopefully you guys have seen the torque curve. So that kind of shows you what the turbo sizing does. So at 3,000 RPM, kind of 2,500 to 3,000 RPM is where the turbos move into their efficiency zone and really start creating boost. So at 3,000 RPM, you're making more than 800 foot-pounds of torque. And then below that, you're making as much torque as an LT6 does, if not a little bit more. So there really isn't a trade-off in that down low from the drivability. But as soon as you get into it and get to that 3,000 and get 800 foot-pounds that low, it carries more than 800 foot-pounds of torque almost to 7,000 RPM. So you have a 4,000 RPM window where you can have more than 800 foot-pounds of torque on tap, which just makes the acceleration pull of the car, we call it relentless. It's boot in the chest, insert explicitive here, sort of ways to describe it. It's surreal. And I don't know if I mentioned it, peak torque comes in at 6,000 RPM at 828 foot-pounds. So most powerful, highest torque engine we've ever put into a Corvette, borderline in a car ever with that, which it's just a complete thrill in that regard. Other side of performance, the other thing at least stands out to me is the rate at which the engine can accelerate the car at speed. You step into it like at 80 miles an hour and the car will still pull over one lateral G forward. So to be at speed and to have that level of acceleration on hand is really an unreal experience and kind of the true definition of, ZR1, king of the hill, bring on your competition, you're not gonna last sort of thing. It's a monster in that set, and to the point there's a lot of good stories of developing this engine when the Pontiac dynos, when we do all our engine work. Back when we did the LT5 for the previous generation ZR1, we kept breaking stuff in the lab, and they finally, we'll put 3,000 horsepower dynos in for you, we'll buy you Inconel exhaust stacks, all this stuff, so this is never a problem again. Yeah, we broke one of those dynos, and we also had an engine, I like to say, freed itself from the shackles of the dyno. It actually tore the dyno off of it, and it hurt the back of the crankshaft a little bit, but we put a new crank in the engine and put it back on test. So we hurt the facility quite a bit there in Pontiac, developing this engine just at the sheer capability of it. And trying to think what other fun little nuggets are out there. Working up to 1,000 horsepower has been a several year-long fun journey for the team. There's a giant group of dedicated engineers that share the passion of everybody on the Corvette team, the small block team, that we all wanted to be here to drop this mic, well, give it to you guys, but drop it on the rest of the world, the competition, and what everybody else is going to bring to it. But through all the analysis, the first time we had all the hardware together on an engine, after countless do loops to go at it, and we spun the thing up, wastegate's wide open, it still makes a little bit of boost, and we were 850, 890 horsepower before we even started pulling the wastegates in. And that first run, cranked him off, the one came up on the screen, hadn't even done the cam phase and tuning timing yet, and there was a lot of Team Small Block Corvette high fives that got a lot that way. And it's finally here today when we can talk to you guys about it. It's awesome. This is going to be a special car, and the engine's a big part of it. And I'm trying to figure out what I forgot. Maybe I will remember during questions if anybody has anything or anything else. Roman? The ultimate goal was how much can you make. That brings into why the 1064, that's just what the number was. When the program first started, our goals were a little bit more modest, I'll admit, which is probably why some of the rumors stuck around out there. But as we sharpened our pencils, did analysis, and the team worked on it, like if we do X, Y, and Z, 4 figures we think is attainable. So we got with the vehicle team because they need to support it from a cooling perspective, right? We're going to ask for more heat rejection. So as a team, we made a conscious decision, like, we're going to swing for the fences and see how far we can hit. And that was 1064. Yeah, the question is, do we break a rear glass with Harlan driving? Hey, Harlan. He's not listening. I don't know that. I don't remember that specific to the ZR1, but maybe early on in the vehicle architecture stage, it could have been. You can ask him later. They want to know if you smashed the rear glass during development driving your car. Is that a story? No. Yeah, if it's on the internet, it's got to be. It's not 850 horsepower? Yeah. Next year. We don't even know. Sorry, go ahead. So the question is on performance variation between the 6 and 7 based on altitude. So LT6 being naturally aspirated, it can only breathe atmospheric pressure. So the most air you can get in is the pressure you're at. So obviously, like all naturally aspirated engines, you go up in altitude, the engine is going to derate. The LT7 having boost control capability, we can mitigate a large amount of that. If you look at the where the torque curve is flat, we're actively managing the wastegate through there. So there's turbo headroom above that, where if you're at altitude and not making to boost pressure because you got to do more work in the turbo, we will do that and we'll bring you up to the same manifold pressure that you would have at sea level. And kind of what we're doing through there, I know it goes through the others' minds and why you're leaving stuff on the table. We're effectively managing to a combustion pressure level so the engine stays together. But yes, the LT7 will have less performance loss at altitude than the LT6 because of the boosting.
What is that pressure? Pressure.
So that's just a fun fact. When we were doing all the power cert work, we got a great analysis engineer who loves fun facts. So we were looking at what the actual exhaust flow was. And Big being Jake, he did the math. So we just did the math on the flow and the cross-section of the tailpipe. He's like, the tailpipes will spit out 37 pounds of boost just from the amount of flow going through it. And I think your question is on boost pressure. About 11 megapascal. But I think I didn't state that earlier. So the nominal boost pressure under steady state or under standard conditions like we rate power at, it's running just a hair under 20 psi. So effectively, you can call it a 20-pound system. That's another good thing I talk about. So why we went turbocharged versus supercharging. There's pros and cons to both of them. As you know, previous generation, we were a big fan of superchargers. What that gave us in the previous generation is, one, the engine's up front. If you look at the width of the LT7, the turbos are on the side. this wide. You can't put that between wheels, and you can't put that between wheels that turn, which drives you to a hot beat configuration. And no good or efficiency comes from putting the turbos on the top of the engine, especially when you want to still see out of the car. So that's historically why we supercharged engines. The mid-engine architecture, and we designed the car around doing turbos like this, mounted low the way we wanted them. And the other side of it is the turbos are inherently more efficient. The LT5 and the previous ZR1 making 755 horsepower was no slouch, but that blower was taking high hundreds of horsepower to run. So that engine was effectively almost a 1,000 horsepower engine or 900 horsepower engine, but you were losing some of it, much of it to run the blower. So if you want to make 1,000 with a supercharger, you got to make 1,200 through the engine, right? So the inherent efficiencies of the turbochargers are huge and a big motivator of why we did that. Forget anything else? Oh, we're good ones. Today we're stating that the top speed will be more than 215 miles an hour, so more than the previous generation. We have to finish the work to test it so we know what it is. We have an idea. And then right now we're stating, once again, we got to finish the track work and all the tuning. We're stating quarter top mile times will be in the 9s with trap speed around 150. The question is around how do we use the direct injection system. The LT7, like the LT6, there's kind of 3 different modes: single, double, and triple pulse. So we do vary it. Most of the time it's single pulse, but there's some operating range for combustion stability or cat light off that will do a multi-pulse injection strategy. So we really use it for all it's worth. So the question's on the lube circuit and oil path. So common LT6 to 7. So the high pressure oil pump sits on the front right corner of the engine, right under the oil tank. So oil is right on top of that pressure. The pump then pumps into the oil cooler that's under the engine, through the oil cooler to the other corner, up through the filter. It then feeds into the back, and we feed the main bearings back to front. And then at the front of the engine, it wires up to the cylinder heads. So we're feeding the bearings first, back to front. Who am I and how long have they let me stay here?
Anybody sitting here?
Oh, sorry. So once again, my name's Dustin Gartner. Technically, I work for the small block team, but the small block team and the Corvette team, it's kind of hard to call us separate teams, even though the organization's separate, because we live and breathe and do this together. I've worked on all small blocks for 23 years now, both Corvette and truck, but it's only been the last 4 years I've been 100% focused on the LT6 and 7 to get these into production. Huh? I'm older than I look. There's no hair under this hat. Oh, that's great. Should have brought that up. Yeah, so the LT6 and 7, or the LT6 today is built in Bowling Green, Kentucky, in the Performance Build Center right alongside Corvette production. The LT7 will run down the same line with the LT6s there in Bowling Green. And that's another big shout out I want to do. And the fact that we hand build these engines in Bowling Green in low volume by a single builder is the only reason we can do an engine like this. Our manufacturing constraints to build at volume in our normal small block plants, you could never build an engine as intricate as these are without what the Performance Build Center gives us. So I give those guys a ton of props. They enable us. The crew down there is fantastic. They're gearheads like all of us. They want to build a good engine, and their name will be on the back of everyone. Oh, you did build your own? Yeah. It's not gone yet, but it's not there yet either. There's a contingent of us that are trying to get that turned back on. So I don't have anything to announce today, but we want to bring it back. Yeah, they're a great team down there. How many different builders do we have? I'm not going to be giving you an exact number, but to put a number on it, we're probably in the... It's probably in the 30s to maybe 40 different builders. They build across 2 shifts. Next year. No, the builder team, that's what I was asking. There's about 30 or 40 engine builders. Oh, how many worked on the engineering team and the design? Oh, one guy. Yep, one guy pushes his build cart to station where we have, needed automation and rundowns and stuff. Yep, and they can build about 2 engines a shift. Yes, start to end. They put the block on their cart and they were not done with it until they put the engine on the rack. I'm the engine guy, but I could say the car was designed with this in mind. That's the reason we have the packaging space. We've essentially engineered this car backwards. We knew where we were going at the end and built in everything we were going to need throughout it. Thank you. So another huge point with the LT7, the power number, this is rated on 93 octane. There's no go get race gas, there's no get a special cow from the dealer, there's no get E85, fill up 93 octane, and that's 1064 capable all day. That's reminding me of that, that's a big point. I don't know if we put one of these on a chassis roll yet. I live in the dyno world. I guarantee you, as soon as we sell a few of them, somebody will. Yes, if you look on the back of either of these two, you'll see the plaque on it like we do on the LT6 with their name on it and Bowling Green Performance Build Center. No price, that would be next year. We got plenty to look at here. Next year, sometime. We're still finalizing some things. No. Yeah, it's not calibrated around enough now. Last call, everybody good? If not, thanks everybody. Enjoy the ZR1.